The candlelight flickered against polished glass, casting soft reflections across the table. It was supposed to be my birthday dinner. My children, their partners. One evening together without arguments, without distance. Just warmth, just family. Instead, the air, filled with laughter, sharp, mocking, unkind. Michael leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest, as if the whole restaurant belonged to him. His girlfriend Clara covered her mouth with delicate fingers, failing to hide her smirk. "Mom," Michael said, voice loud enough for the entire table to hear, "just stop pretending. If you can't afford this, you don't need to put on a show." The waiter still held my black card in his hand, his eyes darting nervously from me to my son. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he murmured. "The card was declined. Would you like to try another?" The words struck like a gavel. The table erupted. Michael's friend snorted into his napkin. Clara's laughter bubbled like champagne. And even the others exchanged glances that stung more than words. I sat very still. My fingers curled around my coffee cup. I did not flinch. I had lived through worse storms than this. But inside me, something cracked. Not because of the declined card. I knew exactly why the system had refused it, but because of the way my own son looked at me, smug, condescending, proud of his cruelty. Clara leaned closer to him, whispering just loud enough, "This is embarrassing." Michael grinned wider. "She just can't let go of the act." They didn't know. They never had. I placed the card gently back in my wallet. The room seemed quieter now, though I could still hear the faint hum of other diners, the clink of glasses, the murmur of servers. Behind me, though, I sensed movement, fast, urgent. The manager. His shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor as he hurried toward our table. His face pale, his tie slightly askew, as if he had abandoned something important just to get here. His eyes locked onto mine, not with pity, not with confusion, but with recognition. And in that moment, before he even spoke, I knew the laughter at the table was about to die. The evening hadn't been my choice. I never wanted the crystal glasses, the imported wine, the prix-fixe menu with dishes I could barely pronounce. I had suggested something else, something smaller, warmer, the little bistro, 2 blocks from my home, where the owner still remembered my late husband's favorite soup, where the tables were worn but comfortable, and where no one judged the price of the wine. But Michael insisted. "You deserve something elegant." "Mom," he had said on the phone, though I could hear the edge in his tone, "let me book somewhere worthy." Worthy. His word. Not mine. And so, here we sat, me, in the back corner of a restaurant draped in velvet and polished brass, surrounded by family members who believed they knew me. They had already decided who I was, the widow in sensible shoes, clipping coupons, living on her pension, trying to hold on to scraps of dignity. I let them believe it. For years, I let them. It was easier than explaining the truth. Easier than correcting every misguided assumption. Easier than showing them the depth of what I had built when they preferred to imagine me small. And tonight, Michael's choice of restaurant was not about honoring me. It was about setting a stage where, in his mind, I would inevitably fail. Clara looked dazzling in her dress, leaning close to him, whispering things into his ear. I knew the kind of young woman she was, the kind who equated wealth with status, who measured worth in handbags and wine lists. To them, I was a performance gone stale, a mother clinging to a fantasy. But they had no idea they were seated in my house. And soon, the walls of this charade would come crashing down, not by my hand, but by the truth itself. To Michael, I was predictable, safe, small. He had drawn that picture of me in his mind years ago. And Clara eagerly colored it in. A widow. A pensioner. A woman who carried peppermints in her purse and wore flats with sensible soles. A relic of another time. It was easier for them to believe that story than to see what was in front of them. Clara leaned into him now. Her voice low but meant for me to hear. She's trying too hard. It's sad. Michael chuckled. His fingers drummed on the table. Smug and rhythmic. She doesn't have to do this anymore. Just admit it. Mom, we can cover you. Cover me. The words fell like a verdict. Dismissive and patronizing. As though my very existence had become a burden to be carried by their imagined generosity. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. They thought I was pretending, staging some fragile performance of wealth. But the truth, the real truth, was that I had always chosen silence over spectacle. And in that silence, they had built a version of me that was easier for them to accept. It hurt. Not because they underestimated me, but because they were so confident in their ignorance, so sure of the lie. I looked around the table at my other children, their partners, their stolen glances that lingered with pity, with faint embarrassment. None of them knew me. Not really. And in their laughter tonight, I heard the echo of every time I had stepped aside to let them shine. Every sacrifice I had buried, every truth I had swallowed. If only they remembered. If only they had ever asked. I remember the winter Michael received his college acceptance letter. He was sprawled across the couch, asleep. The envelope on the table beside him, like a promise waiting to be opened. That same week, I sold my wedding band, the one his father had placed on my finger 30 years earlier. I walked into the jeweler's shop with my hands trembling, the metal cool against my palm. By the time I walked out, the band was gone, and Michael's tuition was paid in full. I never told him. He only said, "Thanks, Mom," before asking if I could co-sign his lease. I did. Quietly. Always quietly. There was the time Clara, long before she became his girlfriend, had a terrible accident on her bike. Her front tooth shattered, nerves exposed, pain written across her face. Insurance wouldn't cover the procedure, and the dentist wanted payment up front. I paid in cash, without question, without hesitation. She was back in school within days, smiling again. She never knew the coat I'd saved for all winter had been returned. Tags still crisp. So I could afford her surgery. And there were the countless days and nights when I ate leftovers from client events, sipping weak coffee in break rooms while troubleshooting crises that no one else could solve. My own children thought I was simply frugal, thrifty, harmless. They called me humble. They called me simple. But I wasn't simple. I was powerful. And yet, here at this table, Michael sat with his chest puffed, mocking me as though I were a child caught playing dress-up. The laughter burned. But my silence, my deliberate silence, was stronger, because I knew what was coming. I knew that within minutes, the truth I had kept hidden all these years would reveal itself, and the smug certainty in Michael's eyes would shatter like glass. They thought money was about bills, cards, accounts, statements. They didn't understand that money, real money, was about timing, about stepping in at the exact moment when life threatened to break someone you loved. There was a day, years ago, when Michael called me in a panic. He was in Boston, fresh out of school, trying to lock down his first apartment. The landlord wanted a security deposit by noon, or the place would be gone. Michael's voice cracked on the phone, his confidence crumbling. "Mom, I don't know what to do. Could you possibly?" I was already in the middle of a video call with a European client. A logistics disaster was unfolding for an international climate summit, and I was supposed to be their calm anchor. I muted my microphone, logged into my account, and wired the full amount within 7 minutes. When I called him back, he said, "Thanks, "Mom, you're the best." That was all. No question of how I had it. No thought of what it might have cost me. I hung up the phone and went back to the client call, sipping stale coffee in a conference break room, smiling through exhaustion as I solved their crisis. My children thought I was frugal because I chose discount blazers. They never realized those blazers hid the fact that I was video conferencing with CEOs and ministers, making decisions that moved millions of dollars in hours. For years, I let them believe the smaller story, because being mom was the role they were willing to accept, not the strategist, not the founder, not the woman who could bend corporations with a few strokes of a pen. Tonight, that illusion was unraveling one cruel laugh at a time. Back at the table, Clara's laughter cut sharp through the velvet air. "Michael, really? This is ridiculous," she said, her eyes flicking toward me like I was an actor on a failing stage. "She doesn't need to pretend anymore. It's humiliating." Humiliating. The word stung. Not because it was true, but because she believed it so easily. Michael leaned in, resting his elbows on the table as though preparing for a lecture. "Mom, listen, we can help you. You don't have to put on this show." I stirred my water slowly, letting the sound of the ice chime against the glass. They thought this was theater. They thought I was performing wealth like a child, pretending to be queen with paper crowns. But the only performance tonight was theirs, the smug display of youth, ignorance, and misplaced superiority. I glanced at my other children, their partners shifting uncomfortably. Not laughing, but not defending me either. Their silence cut deeper than Michael's words. I remembered every birthday cake I had baked by hand when the budget was tight. Every holiday meal I had stretched with creativity, so no one felt the pinch of poverty. Every time I had chosen to be smaller, quieter, so that my children could feel larger, louder, safer. And now here I sat, treated as if I were a relic, trying to grasp a relevance I no longer owned. The irony made me want to laugh. But I didn't. Not yet. Because across the room, I saw the manager moving quickly toward us, and I knew the real performance was about to end. His footsteps were urgent, each one sharp against the marble floor. The manager's face was pale, lips pressed tight, his hands nervously adjusting his tie as he approached. Michael smirked, leaning back in his chair, arms folded. "Here it comes," he muttered, loud enough for Clara to hear. "They're going to tell her it was fake." Clara giggled, the sound thin, brittle. The manager stopped at our table, his chest rising with the effort of his hurried walk. He bowed his head slightly toward me. "Madam," he said, voice trembling, "I must sincerely apologize for the confusion." I saw Michael's grin widen. Certain vindication was about to land in his lap. But the manager wasn't looking at him. He was looking at me with recognition, with deference. His eyes held the kind of panic reserved for those who realize they have nearly offended the wrong person. Michael leaned forward, impatient. "Well, tell her. The card's a scam." "Right." The manager's eyes flicked briefly to my son, then back to me. He shook his head. "No, sir, that is not the issue." The table went quiet. Even Clara's smirk faltered. The manager's hands clasped in front of him, and his voice softened as though the entire room was listening. "The truth, madam, is that this restaurant cannot process a charge from you. Because," he paused, swallowed hard, and then said the words that froze the entire table. "I own it." Silence. Absolute. Heavy. Suffocating silence. Clara's wineglass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Michael's mouth fell open, but no sound came. The others around the table shifted in their seats, eyes darting between me and the manager, searching for some explanation that would make sense. I reached for my napkin, folded it neatly, and set it down. My voice was calm, steady, almost too quiet for the weight it carried. Yes, I said. When this place went bankrupt, I bought it. Quietly. I didn't save it for spectacle. I saved it because I once helped build it, and I wasn't about to watch my work vanish. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip of water, letting the silence stretch. The laughter had died. All that remained was shock. The manager's words still hung in the air. Fragile but undeniable. You own it, Clara whispered, her face pale, her voice a fractured echo of disbelief. Michael blinked hard, his lips parting as if to argue. But no words came. For the first time all evening, he looked small. I set my glass down with deliberate calm. Yes, I said simply. When the restaurant collapsed, when the creditors circled and the lights nearly went dark, I purchased it, not for prestige, not for show, but because I once shaped its foundation. I would not watch it be erased. The table was silent, but I felt the weight of their stares pressing into me. Years of ignorance, of dismissal, of patronizing smiles, all crumbling under one simple truth. I turned to Michael, my son, my own flesh and blood, who sat as if I had just spoken a language he couldn't understand. You chose this place for my birthday, Michael, I said softly. You thought it would expose me. You thought it would humiliate me. But this table, these walls, this very wine, you sip all of it exists because I saved it. His cheeks flushed red, but he said nothing. Clara fumbled for her napkin, her fingers trembling. But you never said. Why would I? I cut gently, not cruelly. It wasn't your business. It wasn't your burden. My life has never been about proving myself to you. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. For the first time, all evening, the balance of power shifted. I was no longer on trial. They were. The manager bowed his head once more. His voice was steadier now, but still tinged with reverence. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, glancing briefly at the table, then fixing his gaze back on me. This is not a customer's card. This is the account of our owner. The word rippled through the table like a stone dropped into still water. Owner. Michael's jaw tightened. Clara's eyes darted between me and the manager, as if waiting for the punchline to a cruel joke. But there was no joke, only truth. The waiter who had earlier returned my card now stood frozen at the edge of the table, his face flushed with embarrassment. Slowly, carefully, he set down the untouched bill, retreating as though afraid to breathe in my presence. Michael finally found his voice, but it was thin, shaky. Mom, you own this place. I tilted my head, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Yes, and tonight, all of you dined in my house. Clara pressed a hand to her chest, her breath uneven. But why didn't you ever? Because, I said, my tone soft but unyielding. I didn't need to. I didn't build this life to prove myself at family dinners. I built it to survive, to provide, to build something that would last. The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter that had come before. My children, my in-laws, even Michael, none of them could meet my eyes. And for the first time, I let the truth fill the space where their pity used to sit. Michael swallowed hard, staring at the polished wood of the table. His bravado had slipped, replaced by something raw, something close to fear. I had no idea, he murmured. No, I agreed, my voice calm. You didn't, and that was by design. Clara shifted in her seat, her hands twisting in her lap. You let us believe, all these years. I looked at her, really looked at her, the young woman who thought wealth was about handbags and reservations, who had laughed at me moments ago like I was a joke, to be dismissed. I let you believe what you wanted to believe, I said, because you were more comfortable with the version of me that was small, safe, dependent. Anything else felt disruptive. Her lips parted, but no words came. Michael finally lifted his gaze to mine, his eyes, once filled with mockery, now brimmed with something else, shame. I thought you were just pretending. I thought it was fake. I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but firm. It was never fake. You simply never bothered to see. The table was still. Even the background murmur of the restaurant seemed distant, muted, as if the very walls were listening. I thought of all the years I had muted myself to keep the peace. All the nights I had worked while they slept. The mornings I had carried the weight alone. And now, here, in the restaurant I owned, I felt no need to hide. The truth had settled between us. Undeniable. Irrevocable. And for the first time, I was not just mom. I was the woman who built an empire in silence. Michael's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles pale. His chest rose and fell, the rhythm unsteady, as if his certainty had cracked open and spilled out across the linen. His voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. I owe you an apology. The words were thin, fragile, not enough to mend the weight of his laughter, but enough to show that something inside him had shifted. I let the silence hold for a moment before answering. Yes, I said softly. You do. He winced, nodding, unable to meet my gaze again. Clara was quieter now, her voice stripped of the smug confidence it carried earlier. I feel like I never knew you, she whispered, her eyes fixed on her napkin as though it might save her from drowning. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. You didn't want to know me, I replied. You wanted me simple, harmless, the kind of woman who wouldn't disrupt your sense of superiority. Her cheeks flushed pink, and she looked away. Across the table, the others sat stiff, no one daring to speak. Their silence was not pity anymore, it was recognition. Uneasy, humbling recognition. For years, they had seen only the version of me that made their lives easier. The mother who said yes, the widow who carried grief quietly, the woman who clipped coupons and smiled at birthdays. Never the strategist, never the founder, never the owner. And now, as the truth settled around us, I felt their perception of me tilt, shatter, rearrange itself into something they had never expected: respect. Michael finally looked up again, and his eyes wet, though he tried to blink it away. I thought you were weak, he admitted, and now I see I was wrong. I studied him, my son, the boy I had once carried through sleepless nights, the man who had forgotten where he came from. You were not just wrong, I said. You were cruel. The words were not angry. They were simple, factual, undeniable. He nodded. Ashamed. Fair. The weight of it all pressed heavy on the table, but for the first time all evening, I did not feel smaller for it. I felt larger, seen, and yet, beneath the steel of my truth, there was still the ache of a mother who only ever wanted love without conditions. The dessert plates had arrived. Jeweled slices of cake, topped with spun sugar. No one touched them. The laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by a silence so taut it felt sacred. I cleared my throat gently, folding my napkin and setting it aside. There's one more thing I'd like to share tonight. Michael's brows furrowed. Clara glanced nervously at him, but neither spoke. I stood, my chair sliding softly against the floor. I booked the rooftop lounge upstairs, just for us. Not for the food, for him. Silence thickened. Today, I said, my voice steady, is the anniversary of your father's passing. 15 years. I didn't want it to be forgotten in awkward glances or drowned in cruelty. I wanted us to remember him properly. Michael's face shifted, his bravado fully gone. Clara lowered her gaze, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I arranged photos. I continued. Flowers. His favorite jazz trio. Even that plum tart he used to sneak from Jefferson Street. My throat tightened, but I refused to let tears fall. Not yet. The table remained silent, but I could feel the air soften. Memories slipping back into their minds, memories of him, of us. As a family before, pride and arrogance hardened them. I reached for my coat, slipping it over my shoulders. The elevator to the rooftop is just around the corner. Come if you want. Stay if you need to. The choice is yours. I walked away, heels quiet against marble. The weight of years carried with dignity in each step. The night air met me outside the lounge, cool and calm. The valet straightened quickly, offering a respectful nod. "Ms. Thornton," he said, "your car will be brought around." Behind me, footsteps approached. Michael. He stood beside me, silent at first, then spoke quietly, his voice stripped of its arrogance. "Why didn't you ever move somewhere bigger, somewhere nicer?" I smiled, slow and deliberate, because I didn't want a showroom. I wanted a home. He nodded, folding that thought into something larger than square footage. Clara appeared moments later, arms wrapped around herself. She didn't speak, but her silence no longer felt cruel. It felt humbled. The car pulled up. The valet opened the door, waiting patiently. I turned back once, toward the rooftop, where music now drifted softly into the night, where candles flickered beside photographs, where grief and love mingled in a space finally honored. Michael followed my gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, I forgot." I touched his arm lightly. "You didn't forget. You just stopped looking." I stepped into the car, the city lights dancing across the windshield. Before the door closed, I left them with one final truth. "Wealth isn't always loud," I said, "but it always remembers who laughed." And then I was gone, leaving them behind, not in shame, but in the heavy silence of recognition.